Okay, 3, 2, 1, we will be live.
Okay, well, I'll let everybody in. Good to go?
Good to go.
Okay, there we go, guys. If everybody wants to mute up.
Are we ready to go there, Ken?
You go right ahead, Gary.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and or good morning or good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. It's our pleasure at the St. John's Storytelling to be able to bring you this international event for World Storytelling Day. One of the beauties, if you will, of this technology that's come out of the...
This meeting is being recorded.
The technology that has evolved during the pandemic has certainly allowed us to do this, which is something we wouldn't have been able to do a couple of years ago. So welcome everybody from wherever you are. And my name is Gary Green, and I'm with the programming committee for the St. John's Storytelling. And we're just delighted to be able to bring this to you. And I personally am excited about the opportunity to host this afternoon because a couple of my favorite tellers are among the lineup, and I'm just delighted to be able to be with you and with them and share a story or two. To get things started, I'm going to read the land acknowledgement as we do, and we would like to respectfully acknowledge that the lands upon which we are working and performing are home of the Mi'kmaq Inuit and Southern Inuit of Newfoundland and Labrador, and the ancestral lands of the Beothuk. We respect the stewardship, wisdom, and resilience of the Indigenous peoples of this land, and wish to express our thanks to be able to work, play, create, share, learn from, and tell stories here. And so we are absolutely honored to have that privilege. For those of you who may need it, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there will be closed captioning, and it is a captioning service that's provided by Zoom. So hopefully all the words will jive with the words that people are saying. Sometimes there's a misspelling of a word there, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along without too much difficulty. If you would like to chat during this process in the afternoon, please feel free to do so, but between tellers. And that way the tellers won't be distracted by seeing text pop up on the screen while they are telling. So please make your comments between tellers, and that would be absolutely great. So we have an order, a running order for the afternoon, and I'll just briefly go through that so you'll know the order in which the tellers will appear. And so our first teller will be Santiago Guzman, and he is not with us this afternoon, but we'll have a recorded presentation by him. He will be followed by Margaret Bennett, and then Marianne Sheik, and then Mara Menzies, and the last teller will be Taffy Thomas. So to start things off, I'll tell you a little bit about Santiago. He's a writer, performer, director, and dramaturg, originally from Mexico, now based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. He's the artistic director of Tudos Productions, the artistic associate for Playwrights Atlantic Resource Center, and general manager of the Neighborhood Dance Works in St. John's. Santiago's work aims to put local underrepresented narratives and characters in the front lines while inviting audience to appreciate the vibrancy of Newfoundland and Labrador from a diverse perspective. He is a member of Playwrights Canada Press's inaugural editorial committee. As an immigrant, queer, and artist of color, Santiago believes that representation really matters. So Ken, if you would play that for us, that would be great.
I am originally from Metepec, Mexico, a small city just outside of Mexico City. But when I say small city, you should definitely picture something way bigger than St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. And when I was there, I used to go to a school that had a Lost and Found. Fun fact, it was actually called Lost and Found and not Perdido y Encontrado in Spanish because, well, it didn't make sense grammatically speaking, but also because I went to a bilingual school. And the thing about going to the Lost and Found was that it was one of the most embarrassing things you could do at school, because that implied that your parents already knew you had lost something, so you had to ask the custodians to let you into this very, very dark room in the school to see if you could find the thing that you had lost. There were two possible outcomes, obviously, from going to the Lost and Found. One, being very lucky and finding the thing that you had lost, but perhaps finding it slightly different, I don't know, broken, damaged, you name it, moldy. I'm thinking of lunch. Now I'm getting hungry. Anyway, but at least that way you would get forgiveness from your parents, understanding, and the love that you had lost in the first place. In my personal experience, I lost several plastic containers that my mom really, really loved for some reason, and at times it felt that she loved them more than she loved me. But anyway, and I guess it was because every single time that I would bring these Tupperware containers back home after being lost, what she would find would be all of these moldy lunches that she had prepared for me with all of her love and patience and energy. But at least, for some reason, she was very happy that she got the Tupperware container back. So that was the first option. The second one was leaving the Lost and Found empty-handed, fully knowing that you were going to have a second conversation with your parents where they were going to express yet again how disappointed they were with you, as though the first one was not enough. But anyway. The thing here about the experience of the Lost and Found is the lesson that we learn, which is, yeah, we don't want to lose anything ever again, because there is a 50-50 chance of finding what you have lost or not at all. And honestly, who wants to deal with that game of fate? Not me. Now, the thing is that I am no longer in Metepec, I am in St. John's. I no longer go to school, I work, and my mom doesn't prepare my lunches anymore, though it will be nice, honestly. I miss you, Mom. But the thing that has remained the same is my, how do I put this? I don't want to say hate, but how much I dislike that uncertainty of finding what you're looking for and not finding what you're looking for. Which reminds me of dating apps. I mean, I hope that you're not judging me right now because I am pretty sure that everyone, at least my age, has tried dating apps at some point. And the thing about them is that they could be really great if you know what you're signing up for. In the beginning, I didn't know what I was doing because I was looking for Prince Charming. And there's no one to blame other than Disney because I was looking for Prince Charming. But there you go. I encountered, as always, this 50-50 chance of finding what I was looking for. At times I would find great friends, great dates, but also I found a lot of disappointment. For instance, I was getting ghosted a lot. And for those of you who don't know what ghosting means, it's this act of stopping engaging with someone through a dating app. They just completely stop answering to your texts. Sometimes they block you. They just disappear. Poof, they vanish. And that happened to me a lot. But with those experiences, you start building up a tough skin. Because probably by the 11th man that, ghosts you, then you probably aren't as affected as the first one because, you have to move on. Life is beautiful. All of those things. I try to hold on to those small things around me that bring me joy. Like the sun. And really, getting lucky with sun here in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador is rare. So every single time that there's a sunny day, I try to take it all in. And I don't know about you, but I do feel all of my oats. I feel like I am it. I just go for a walk, breathe fresh air. Sometimes it's very, very cold air, but that's okay. And there was actually one day, it was one of the first few days that I was here in St. John's, that I went for a walk. And I was just listening to my music, taking pictures. Again, it was my first time walking down the streets of downtown St. John's, and I was having a blast. And then, all of a sudden, I saw at a distance an individual that looked like someone that I had met before. And I thought to myself, because of what he looked like, that it was a friend that I had worked on a film set. And he was very nice to me. He was actually very kind, very patient. And when I saw him at a distance, I thought that it was a great thing because I was here and I was really excited to say hello. So he was standing there surrounded by his very, very cool friends. But I didn't care. I just wanted to go there and say hello, which I did. So I ran and hugged him. I just jumped on him and hugged him and say, "Oh my God, how are you? How are you doing? How have you been? So great to see you." And he just said, yeah, great seeing you. And then I thought that he felt a little weird, solid. And I thought to myself, well, obviously, he's surrounded by his very cool friends. Of course, he's a little bit uncomfortable. So I took a step back and held him from the shoulders. And then I could tell that he was really, really avoiding my face. But it wasn't until I looked through his Ray-Ban mock-ups that I got to catch his blue eyes and realized that this beautiful man that I was holding on my hands was the very kind, gentle, funny man that ghosted me after we went together for a date a couple of weeks prior. So I thought to myself, what do I do? I am hugging this stranger that I went on a date with who ghosted me. Disappointment, much. Anyway. And all of a sudden, I started looking at his face once again, and it began looking like a moldy launch from one of those that I had lost in the past. And I was like, you know what? I think we should go. So, we just laughed awkwardly, obviously, and then we said goodbye. And then I just walked away from the situation, thinking that I had found the thing that I had lost, but I didn't feel as though it was worth taking it with me. And for once, I was not disappointed by that fact. And I thought to myself, I don't think my mom would be disappointed either. So I just moved on and carried on with my day. And there you go. This is how Lost and Founds have changed the way that I date. No, just kidding. That I had lost, but I didn't feel as though it was worth taking it. And for once, I was not disappointed by that fact. And I thought to
So there you go, a great introduction to this year's theme of Lost and Found. Just a terrific story. Our next teller is Margaret Bennett. And Margaret Bennett is one of my all-time favorite storytellers. She has been a mentor to me over the years, and is just one of the people I love to hear a story from. And Margaret's originally from the Isle of Skye. She grew up there as a little girl, and from a Gaelic mother and a Scots Lowland father, and came to Newfoundland about 1968 or so, stayed here for maybe 7-8 years, went to school at Memorial University, did a master's degree in folklore, and then went back to Scotland, where she became an educator herself, a professor at Edinburgh University, and then went on to be a part-time faculty member now in the Conservatory of Scotland, and wants to ensure that traditional storytelling and music, song carries on to the next generation. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to present for you this afternoon, Margaret Bennett.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you for inviting me. It's hard to believe it's over 50 years since I first went to St. John's. And I can tell you, I've never lost my love of Newfoundland or the Newfoundlanders. I felt at home right away. I really did. So there's only one thing wrong with this session, is that I'm not right there, but I am in a way. I'm certainly there in spirit. It's lovely to see you all. Really lovely. And even the lobster pot there beside Ken, I thought, oh my word, right down on the, yes, I enjoy that. Well, I'm going to take you back quite a few years from my story. When I was growing up in Skye, well, actually, I was 7 before we had electricity, so stories were quite important. We didn't know we were storytellers or anyone else either. You just told stories or sang. And the old men in particular used to talk about this man his name was John Cameron, but they called him Corachiley because he lived in a place called Corachiley. Now, I had no idea if this man was dead or alive, but he was certainly alive in the stories. I was to learn afterwards that he died even before my grandfather was born. Now, my grandfather was born in 1881. So my word, this man must have been memorable. They're still telling stories about him. So I thought I would tell you a lost and found story that is true. And I'll tell you a little about the man first. I almost feel like I know him or I've met him because I've heard so many stories about him. He was a cattle drover. And he came, it was very common to be a cattle drover in the 17 and 1800s. And it, in fact, even in my own young day, you still yet will see people with a drove of cattle, but they're not quite as many as they used to drive. You might only see 20, 30, 40 these days. And the black cattle, the big Highlanders with the horns and the beautiful cattle, they were the beasts that really fetched them. And they went to markets. Actually, I live right now right near a very little town called Crieff. And that was one of the main market towns. And there was another one in Falkirk. And the markets, they would have 10,000 cattle on a weekend market, selling them at these places. And they would get driven again off down to London or Smithfield Meat Market. It was huge. The army used to buy their meat from these markets. But back to John Cameron. His parents kept an inn, which they called a toll house. And it was over near Fort William on the west coast. And it was quite not an isolated place, but it was a very useful place because it was a place where there was a big green meadow beside it. And when the drovers were taking their cattle, they might do maybe 20 miles in one day, and they would stop at what they call a stance. That was just a meadow where they could graze their cattle for the night. And naturally, they would be thirsty, having been on their way. They would go into the inn and have a wee dram, something to eat, a few songs. But meanwhile, when they stopped at the Cameron's place, well, there was the lad, that was John himself. He was only 10, 12 years old. They would say, here's a penny for you. You keep your eye on the cattle now. I don't want anything happening. I don't want any of them straying. And so they herded the cattle. Now, herding cattle is a pleasure. We used to do it, but only for 5 cows for my grandparents. But he would be there with a stick herding the cattle. And now don't lose any. And he didn't. And gosh, when there was a market ahead of the time, there would be people there every day, and he gathered quite a few pennies. Well, he liked to listen to their stories, and he learned that they made a good living at this. And they saw the country. They walked miles and miles with these cattle. He would like to do that. But the best way to do it would be to maybe get a few animals of his own. So he started off and he saved up and he managed to buy a goat, one little kid, and he had a few sheep, and he got a calf. He could graze them. And finally, when he was in his middle teens, really, one of the drovers said, well, you can come with the next drove. Now, what we do is you need some money there because you're going to buy cattle, and you gather them along the way. You buy, you sell, you make a profit, you raise your own stock, bring back the good breeders, and that's how you'll do it. So his very first drove with these older and experienced drovers. It was a long walk. And they walked actually from Skye. It took them 6 weeks to get to Crieff. 6 weeks. And they could sleep out. Oh, they were tough. They were tough. And he said, now, have you got your money? Yes, he said. And actually, this is a long time ago, he had actually saved up £200. That's a fortune. £200 on cattle. And so the drover said to him, now, don't carry that around with you in the market because there's pickpockets. And if you lose that money, you've lost everything. You've lost your whole life earnings. You have to start again. So look after it. And what we usually do is open a bank account. Now, the banks aren't open all the time. So put half of your money in a bank and take the other half. You'll have to stay a night at one of the inns. And your own people keep an inn, and you've seen this yourself, he said. They will give some of their money for the safekeeping of the inn, and they have a safe, and they lock a little box, and you go and you'll get it the next day. So he thought, well, I'll do that. So he checked in at the inn, and the drovers were gathering, the cattle were filling up the whole area. There were hundreds of them, thousands of them. And he thought, oh, this is so exciting. Went to the bank and he put the half of the money in. And the banker said, no, we close at 3 o'clock. So that's after that, you'll not get it till tomorrow. That's all right, he said. I've got that covered. He took the other half and he handed it to the innkeeper. He said, I understand you'll keep this in a safe place for me. I will that, he said, I will that. He was fairly new to the trade and none of these drovers recognized him. He was a new fellow. Took over the inn, came in from somewhere afar, they didn't quite know where. So that was fine. Then did quite well at the market and he needed the £100. So he went to the innkeeper. He says, my £100, he said, that I gave you yesterday, he said, could I have it back now? He said, what £100? You didn't give me any £100, you Highland ignoramus, he said. You gave me nothing, he said. He said, I did. He said, your word is your honor. You took it. You said you would lock it away safely. I said nothing of the kind. You never came through the door of this office. You sat and you drank a whiskey in the bar and you had a bowl of soup, but you didn't come in here. Well, he was absolutely beside himself. He had to go back to the people to whom he was going to give the money. And they had with them another old drover. And I said, I don't know what to do. He said, well, he said, I'll tell you what. He said, I have a friend who's a lawyer. Now, it'll cost you £2 or £3, but it'll be worth it. Get his advice. Well, he saw this lawyer person and he said, take that friend, the trustworthy one with you. And tomorrow, he said, and get the money out of the bank. That second £100, he said. And take your friend, he said. And as your friend is standing beside you, he said, try it again. Entrust him with £100. He said, what? Oh, no, he said, you've got a witness in your friend. And when you go back, take the friend with you. And in fact, he said, don't, he said, and I'll tell you how to do this, he said. And he told him how to do it, which will turn out. So he went to the bank, he got the second £100, and he went to the innkeeper. He said, now, I'm starting again. Do you see this £100? Yes. Do you see me? He said, I'm standing in your office with a little locked compartments. Yes, he said. He said, do you see my friend here? This is my friend, he said, and he's with me watching this. He said, can I trust you with £100 today? Of course you can. You could trust me any day with £100. You could trust me with anything. Yes, I'll take that, he said, and he locked it in the little drawer. And away he went. Well, a few hours later, he was at the bouquet sale and he was looking at the cattle, and he thought, oh, this is just splendid. He was going to have a great day. And in the morning, as he was went back to the inn, and he saw the innkeeper, and he said to him, I'd like my £100 now, he said. Yes, certainly, he said. You gave me that last night. Yes, certainly, he said, I'll give you the £100, he said. He gave him the £100. And away he went. He bought some cattle, came back to the inn in the evening with the friend. And he and the friend went to the innkeeper, and he said, now, he said, you'll remember last night, my friend and I came in, he said, and I gave you £100. He said, I'd like that back, please. Well, he knew he was caught. He said, you witnessed it, didn't you? I certainly did. I saw you give him the £100, so give it to him right back. And what the innkeeper hadn't reckoned on was, when he gave him back the first £100, he thought he'd forgotten. But no, he got the second £100 back because the witness was standing beside him, and he didn't lose a penny, but he certainly gained a lot of friends. And the innkeeper changed his mind about thinking what stupid Highland ignoramuses these Gaelic-speaking drovers were. They were actually quite wise. Now, if you would like to hear another story about the same man, I could tell you one. Would you like another story about him? I'd better tell you what he looked like. Not that I've ever seen him, but I've heard him described so many times. He didn't wear a belted plaid like a kilt, like some of the drovers. He actually wore trews, tweed, homespun, grey, and he wore a homespun jacket. He wasn't a tall man. In fact, he was my height, 5'3" or so. Well, it doesn't cut a very striking figure among these big Highlanders, a man who's 5'3", although he had stature in another way. So for some reason, Carhailey took it in, they called him Carhailey, the name of his farm. Carhailey took it into his head that he would wear a stovepipe hat. Could you picture him? A stovepipe hat. It made him look about a foot taller, and he felt taller, so that was fine. And he also took to taking a little Highland pony with him. It was very handy for carrying his things. He often walked along beside it, but then he could also ride his pony. He could go far further, and it's said that he would go from Fort William to Inverness. That's a long way. That takes you an hour on a train, for goodness sake. Or more. He could walk that and go on his pony. He went all over Scotland. and he got quite a reputation. He also gathered to himself a lot of cattle. He never owned a piece of land in his life. He leased them because, you see, in the Highlands of Scotland, and I'm sorry to say it's still the same today, vast areas of land are owned by the landed gentry. Sir so-and-so and Sir MacDonald hyphenated something else, so-and-so. And people just, well, you see, it's rather like the native peoples of Canada, because the idea of ownership of land is a sort of strange concept to the Gael. There's no words or phrases in the Gaelic language for I own land. You see, the land owns you. So it didn't bother Corrachaile, he didn't own any land. But by the time he was 30, he had leased 11 farms and could pay the rents of them all to graze his cattle. He had over 1,000 black cattle, and he was a wealthy man. They said that when he drove down to Crieff, sometimes it would take up miles of road, going at a nice pace. Actually, this way of life, I should tell you, ended at the turn of the 20th century when the trains came in and cattle trucks. They didn't need that anymore. And I think I'd like to tell you as well that my grandfather's brother had been a drover. No longer when the train came in. So he went to America, became a cowboy. A lot of them did. They were good horsemen too. So back to Corrachaile. He went to the islands, and from the Isle of Skye, when they were going from the Isle of Skye to the mainland, they used to swim the cattle across. They would get one big beast who was the swimmer. And the swimmer would go in, and a boat, a rowing boat ahead, and that beast would follow. And the cattle were good swimmers. They kept the swimmer, took him home again. That's how they crossed. But on the other islands, like the Isle of Mull, for example, that's too far. So they took a ferry boat, and they could take the cattle in that. And on this particular day, it was the most beautiful day. Corrachaile, by this time, had several drovers who worked for him, young lads like he'd been. They were going to be, and they would enjoy themselves on the road. The crack was good. The stories were good. And they'd had a really good day on the island of Mull. And they were coming back, or what a day it was for sailing. You know, that kind of a day when you get out in a boat, and my word, you feel the wind in your face and the sun too. There's nothing like it. And so the drovers that were with him, they were sort of in the stern of the boat looking, and maybe a few were in the bow. But he was sitting on a bench looking at a young woman who was sitting across from him. She was the most beautiful young woman. Now, he wasn't looking, as we'd say in the modern day, lusting after this woman. He was admiring a beautiful human being. And she was totally engrossed in a book, like there was nobody else in the whole world. She didn't notice him staring at her. And Corrachaile didn't have the sort of sophistication that most of you have when your parents tell you, now don't go staring at people. Don't go staring at people. But he was gazing at her. And beside her was a gentleman. Now, he was an older man, and I'm not sure, was he her father or perhaps a husband who was a bit older. And he was so amused. He was a gentleman. He was so amused at this rather peasant-looking man with a stovepipe hat on his knee, by the way, staring at her. And he said, "Are you admiring the lady?" "Oh, yes, she's fine looking. I don't think I ever saw better. I don't think I..." Now, by the way, Corrachaile was happily married. He wasn't looking for a woman or a partner. He was happy. He was just admiring her. He says, "Oh, yes, she's fine looking." He says, "I've been at many a cattle sale, and I don't think I've ever seen a finer one. Oh, yes, a good sturdy limb on her as well." Well, the man was a bit taken aback, and he said, "You sound as if you'd like to buy her." "Is she for sale?" said Corrachaile. I didn't know that you would be selling a woman. Well, I'm a drover myself, you probably know that. And he said, well, what's she worth? Well, the man said, 1,000 guineas, which is £1,000 and 1,000 shillings. That's a lot of money. Even now, it's a lot of money. 1,000. And he thought this was such a joke, and he was really, really making fun of this peasant man who had not much education or learning. 1,000 guineas, said Carachayli. Well, he said, I did say I never saw a better one, so she's probably worth it, probably worth it. Yes, I would think so. Well, said the gentleman, you would like to buy her then? Well, he says, it'll be the first time I ever bought a woman, but I didn't know that people would do that. But yes, he said, I'll buy her. Yes, 1,000 guineas, that's a good, fair price. Yes, he said, I would do that then. And he said, now in my way, the custom is that if you agree on a bargain, you take a shilling, a piece of silver, and you shake the hand on it. So he took the shilling out of the big leather purse and he handed it to the gentleman and took it between the two hands, and they shook hands. It's a bargain, said Carachayli. And the man put his shilling in the pocket and laughed and laughed. He said, what a silly man. Well, anyhow, the boat was coming up the Clyde. It's on its way to Glasgow, actually, not to Oban, on its way to Glasgow. And it docked at a port called Greenock in the mouth of the Clyde. It was known for shipbuilding. Well, Carachayli got off the boat and he made straight for the bank. And he said, I'd like to draw 1,000 guineas, please. So he got that in £20 notes, and it was 20 in £1,000 and 1,000 shillings. He put it in a large leather purse, put it in his pocket. By this time, the boat had sailed on, but he got on a train. And the train got there before the boat, and there he was at the Broomielaw docks in Glasgow, waiting for them all to come off the boat. Well, the gentleman couldn't believe his eyes when at the bottom of the gangway, when they docked, who should be standing there, hat and all, but Carachayli, Cameron of Carachayli. Oh, he said, I'm here. Yes, he said, and he held the purse up. He said, and I've got my 1,000 guineas, he said, and I've come to collect the lady. Oh, no. He said, you must realize that was a joke. It had to be a joke, he said. I mean, nobody, for goodness sake, my man, goodness sake. And he was, oh no, said Carachayli. It wasn't a joke. You took my piece of silver and you shook your hand on it. That is as good as a bargain. Your word is your honor when you take a hand and shake it on a piece of silver. No, said the gentleman. I mean, and the lady, by the way, who'd been so oblivious reading her book on the boat, she had no idea this was going on. She said, what's all this? Carachayli said, madam, he said, I've just bought you. That man has just sold you for 1,000 guineas. What? She said, you can't have done that. Well, he just did, and he agreed and he promised, and I kept my promise, and here's the money in the bag, and it's, you won't, and count it, there's not a penny missing. Please, he said, please, you must understand, that had to be a joke. He said, look, is there anything I can do, buy, pay, anything, but please, just forget about it. Well, said Carachayli, I'm a Highlander and never break my word. A Highlander is as good as his word. And I swore that I would give you this, and here's the money. But the lady said, sir, please, I beg you, please don't go through with this. Well, he said, my admiration for the lady is enormous. And my honor for the lady is greater. And for that reason, but not to break my word, I will let it go by. And the gentleman, yes, he said, there is something you could do for me. Yes, there is. He said, I've never been to one of those grand, special, lavish, luxurious hotels for dinner in Glasgow. Do you know of any? I certainly do, said the man. In fact, my lady and I dine there now and again. It's quite splendid. You can have whatever you want, whatever you want. Whiskey, of course, said Carachiley. What would be a meal without a glass of whiskey? But not just for myself, he said. Oh, no, it has to be for myself and my drovers. Certainly, he said, bring them along and we'll call a cab. And they were horse-drawn cabs. Well, 20 drovers appeared behind Carachiley. And 20 drovers and the man himself, John Cameron, were taken to the poshest hotel in Glasgow. And it cost the man a pretty penny, but at least he didn't lose the lady. John Cameron of Carachiley.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great story, a set of stories, and I was right back there in the Highlands when you were telling that, and I remember Ruth and I along with some friends were in one of those drover inns in the Highlands. Can't quite remember, somewhere up near Oban, I think at one point.
Yeah.
We were there. Great.
Yes, there is one. Yes, there's a few of them. Toll houses are still there. They go back to the 1700s. Yes, a great place for a storytelling session, by the way. Just a thought.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I long to be back in Scotland again, and it was so good to hear you today. And thank you very much for your stories. Our next teller is Marion Sheep, and she also went to Memorial University, received a Master's of Arts degree in anthropology, and she has spent about 22 decades working on human rights and social change. Marion uses storytelling in her work to bring about social change. She comes from a long line of poets, singers, and storytellers in northern Kenya. She lives in St. John's right now with her two daughters. So please welcome Marianne.
Thank you very much. What splendid stories those are. So this evening, I would like to tell you a story from back home where I come from. And in the spirit of Lost and Found, you will guess what was lost and what was found. And the story is entitled Intelligent Love. So in northern Kenya, the communities are mainly pastoralists. So we keep cattle, goats, sheep, and camels. And we are nomads. So we move from place to place looking for pasture and water for animals. We have makeshift homes, which we dismantle and put on top of the camels and move with them and settle. Wherever we settle, we put them up. They are huts, dome-shaped. They are called herio. So there were these two communities that were always at loggerheads. They would not agree on anything, not the pasture land, not the watering points, not marriage, anything. They were always like in conflict. And after very many years of fighting and bloodshed, they decided, well, we can agree to live side by side, but don't touch me, I don't touch you, sort of a situation. And after very many years, a guy from one of the community and a lady from the other met at a watering point one of the days. And he took interest and he started like talking to her and asking her where she came from. And he immediately knew she came from the opponent. But he was really smitten. This was a beautiful girl, and he was really interested. And amidst everything, he really wanted to try his luck. in getting her hand in marriage. And the lady was very skeptical at first, but later she was like, well, if you can come up with a plan so that not my life or yours is endangered, then fine, I'm in agreement. And so they agreed they were going to elope. And for them to elope, the guy had to come to her homestead to sort of like pick her up, although this was not like a normal situation where I would have to face to show his face in the community. So they agreed, and in that part of the world, there's a lot of knowledge on paths and on trees and on the different soil types, and this is how people know their ways. So the lady told him on the towards the sunset side from her homestead, there's this particular tree and there's that particular shrub there. And so she described what the area would look like. And so they agreed that he would come and place the guntina that she will wear. Guntina is a traditional Somali women wrap around. So you tie it on one shoulder and you wrap it around yourself. And there's no way a girl would elope with a man wearing the same clothes she had from her home. So he had to bring her a new one. So they agreed where he was going to drop the guntina, and so she could dress and they take off. And one of the clear signs that a girl has eloped with a man was when the families find her clothes from home, like not very far from the homestead. Then that would be a clear sign that she has actually gone eloped with a man. So on this particular night, when they agreed that he would come and all the plan, it rained. And it rained calves and kids. We don't keep dogs, so I can't say cats and dogs. So calves and kids, it rained so much. And this girl was in one of the huts, the dome-shaped area, with her cousins and many of them in there. Now she was worried. How does she get out? Will she be able to see this man if she goes out? What happens? So she was just in this hut, and they were making stories, but she was just making stories loudly so that just in case he decided to venture into the homestead, he can hear her voice and follow and come. And sure enough, as she talked with her cousins and they made stories and laughed and joked, she felt someone pinch her elbow from underneath the area. So when we put up the dome-shaped skeleton, we cover them with mats with very beautiful patterns called dufula. And so he put his hand through and pinched her arm to alert her that it was him. So this girl knew this man had dared, and he had come up to that close. He was now within the homestead. His life was in danger. And so she decided she was going to narrate their story to her cousins and make it look like it was another girl. So she started the story and she told them there's this girl and this man who met, and all the story and how the families were and the feuds between them up to that point when the guy pinched her arm. And so she said, and of course it's her story, but she's making it look like it's this other girl telling the story. So she says that the girl told the guy, if you are a fool, come in and be killed. But if you are bright enough, go and stay at the bush where we agreed. So he got the message and he moved away. And when the rain subsided a bit, she took off, removed her guntina, put on the new guntina, and they eloped. And they were married. And after a couple of back and forths, they were allowed to marry. And through that, the families gained a lasting peace. Thank you.
Th- Thank you very much for that great story. It's really interesting to hear, and I greatly appreciate your time today to do that for us. Thank you. The next teller that we have this afternoon is Mara Menzies, and she is an award-winning storyteller whose dynamic, colorful style brings an ancient art form to life. She's been invited to share her stories in 27 countries with her latest production, Blood and Gold, exploring the legacy of colonialism and slavery through the myth, legend, and fantasy. And I've had the chance to see a little bit of that online. An amazing performance, an amazing story. It has received nominations in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2019 and in 2020 for awards. And she is a storyteller who draws on her rich cultural heritage to create stories that explore our deepest fears, joys, loves, jealousies, passions, and mysteries, all of life. She finds truths about humanity in stories. She creates bespoke stories, informing, inspiring, and entertaining. She is the founder of Quail Sculpture Park and Heritage Trail in Magani, I'm going to say, village in the Kenyan coast, creating a heritage trail that demonstrates the beauty and richness of the local culture and stories alongside the Magani Rising, a unique community development organization. So I'm so pleased to be able to welcome Mara here this evening. Please.
Thank you so much. And and apart from that slight the power cut where I'm in Kenya, we had a power cut just before starting, so that's that's all fixed, so we are good. But really lovely to hear another Kenyan voice from the very north. Oh, here goes the power again. Goodness, I've got my torch here. Hold on. Sorry about that. There we go. Lovely to hear another voice from the very north of Kenya, and then also another voice from the Isle of Skye as well. And I've loved all the other storytellers so far. But I'm going to be telling you a story that I heard a few years ago when I was traveling, and I was in Havana in Cuba. And what I found really interesting about this story and how it fits into the theme of this evening in terms of being lost and found is that I discovered that it was a lost story. And I took this story home to Nigeria, where it originated from. And just to give you a little context, I used this story for the Blood and Gold novel and production, but this story is one of the Orisha stories. And the Orisha are deities that from the Nigerian faith system called Ifa. And to explain, it's a little bit like the Greek gods. If you have Olodumare, who is at the very top, the creator of everything. And then below Olodumare, you have the Orisha of war, the Orisha of joy, the Orisha of dancing, the Orisha of children, the Orisha of everything. There are hundreds of Orisha. And what happened during the transatlantic slave trade is that people would worship these deities, and then when they were taken over to the New World, they were no longer allowed to practice their faith. But what they did was that they hid these deities behind the Catholic saints. So when they were praying to the Virgin Mary, for example, in reality for them, they were praying to Yemaya, who is the mother of the ocean, the mother of fish. When they were praying to Saint Cuthbert, they would pray to another deity, and so on and so forth. And so this is how we have in Cuba, it's the syncretic faith Santeria, and in Brazil you have Candomblé. So these originated with this crazy fusion of Catholicism and Ifa. And I was invited to tell this story in Nigeria, and it was taken. And what I discovered was that this deity is one of the major deities in Santeria, but in Nigeria there were not that many people who had heard this story. So it was taking a lost story and taking it home. And it's a story of a man, and this man, his name was Ochosi. And Ochosi was one of the finest hunters that had ever lived. He stayed right in the center of a forest, a beautiful place, and he loved and respected everything around him. He knew every blade of grass, he knew the twigs, he knew the branches. Whenever the trees saw him, they would bow and they would bend and they would greet him as he passed. And Ochosi was such a good hunter. He knew that whenever he took his traps and snares and placed them down, whatever he wanted to catch, he would find there a few hours later. He knew that whenever he took a bow and arrow, as soon as he released that arrow, he knew that it would pierce the heart of the animal of which he was hunting. Ochosi was a man with a dream. And the thing that he wanted more than anything else in the world was to become one of the Orisha. And every single morning, the first thing he did, he would throw himself to the ground, he would raise his arms to the sky, and he would beg and plead, Olodumare, God of many names and one, I beg you, please, let me join Yemeya, let me join Elegba and Oshun in your service, send me a sign, please. But unfortunately for Ochosi, no sign ever came. And so he had no choice but to continue doing the things that needed to be done. So he would hunt, he would pray, and sometimes he would visit his mother, his beloved mother who lived on the other side of the forest. Now one day, he was feeling a bit peckish, and he thought to himself, I would love some delicious game meat. And so he took his bow and his arrow, and he went out into the forest. He hunted around, and there he saw a young antelope. And a few hours later, he was sitting in front of his house, and he was roasting this delicious meat, and the smell began to waft upwards into the forest air. It began to float through the branches, and it just so happened that one of the Orishas, the Orisha Elegba, who is the master of destiny, the bringer of chaos, the one who must be respected at all times, he happened to be walking through the forest. Now, Elegba is the kind of Orisha who loves the naughty things in life. So too much fine food, too much wine, too much partying, too much dancing, too much everything, far too many lovers, everything he lived to excess and loved to excess. And when he smelt this meat, he thought, where is this meat? And he followed his nose and he found himself at Ochosi's house. And when he found himself there, Ochosi immediately recognized who this was. And he was overwhelmed. Please sit with me, eat with me. Whatever is mine is yours. Let me wash your hands. Let me wash your feet. Please join me. And Elegba did. And the two of them, they sat and they shared story after story after story. They told each other jokes. They sang songs. They enjoyed each other's company immensely. And Elegba told Ochosi of a party that was taking place in 3 days' time. And this party would take place in Orun, the home of the Orisha. And Ochosi, he listened to this story and he knew every single thing that he could imagine would possibly come true. He could see the colors of the robes the Orisha would be wearing. He could imagine the aroma of the foods. He could think of the music, but he knew that as a mere mortal, he would never be able to attend this party himself. And so he contented himself with just dreaming. But when the meal had ended, Elegba stood up and he turned to Ochosi and he said, Ochosi, I wonder if you can help me. When I go to this party, I want to take a gift for the Creator, a gift for Olodumare, but I want this gift to be something that has never been gifted before. I want it to be unique, something special, something truly beautiful, worthy of the great Creator, but I have no idea what to take. I wonder if you can help me. And Ochosi knew that this was his moment. This was his chance. If he could please all the Orisha, anything could happen. And so he racked his brains. He thought, what can I propose? And then finally he had it. Deep in the center of the forest, there was a bird. And this bird had the most beautiful wings, feathers every shade of the rainbow. This little bird, whenever it opened its beak, the sound that came out was stunning, sweeter than honey. And he knew that this bird would be the perfect gift for the great creator. And so he told Eligba of his plan. And Eligba was pleased. And he said, very well, I will return for that bird in 3 days' time. And off he went. Well, that night, Ochosi had the finest, sweetest dreams. He could imagine the impending glory. And first thing the following morning, he picked up his traps. He went out into the forest. He placed the traps down. He returned home brimming with confidence. And a few hours later, pakatang, 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 he marched back into the forest. He went straight to the traps, ready to receive the bird. And when he reached the traps, the first one was empty. The second was empty too. And the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, all the traps were empty. And this had never happened to him before. And for the first time in his life, he could feel a seed of doubt planted in his chest. But he gathered up his traps and he went to a new part of the forest. He placed the traps down and he returned home and he waited. But this time he was pacing up and down anxiously. And after a few hours, pakatang, 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 he returned to the forest. He headed straight for the traps and the snares. He looked down and the first one was empty. The second one was empty. The third, the fourth, the fifth, all of them were empty. And now he began to panic. What would happen if he did not find this bird? He could imagine the shame. Who would respect him then? The Orishas, they would mock and laugh at him. Oh, look, there is Ochosi, the hunter who could not hunt. He could not allow that to happen. And so he took his traps and he went to the furthest reaches of the forest. He placed the traps down, he raised his arms to the sky and he begged for assistance. Please, Olodumare, this gift is for you. This is when I need your help more than ever. I beg you. He placed the traps down and then he returned home and he waited. And a few hours later, he returned back to the forest. And when he reached the traps, the first one, empty. The second one, empty. The third, the fourth. But in the fifth, he saw something moving, something shifting. He saw flashes of color and light. And when he opened that little door, that little cage, there was the bird, more beautiful than he had remembered. And he gently took it out. He placed it next to his chest. He carried it home. And in his house, on a shelf, he saw a cage. He took the little bird, he placed it inside the cage. He locked the door. And then he looked around for some grain because this bird had to be in perfect condition, worthy of the great creator. When he looked around, there was no grain in his house, and so he had no choice but to go and get some. And while he had left, when he was gone, there was a knock on his door. Hadi! A voice came, and it was his mother. She had traveled across the forest to see her beloved son, and when there was no answer, she let herself in. She looked around. She snorted at the fact that her son was never there like usual. What is the world coming to, all these young people never home for their parents? She was furious, but then she looked around and she saw all the tokens from the hunt, and she was filled with a sense of motherly pride, and she thought to herself, my beautiful son, my strong son, my talented son. He is the finest hunter in the entire world. And when he comes home, I want him to be happy. I want to give him a gift, something, but what will make him happy? And she mused and she mused, and of course she had it. She would prepare a delicious meal. She would fill his stomach, and that was sure to give him joy. And she thought to herself, I wonder what meal I could make. What would give him real joy? And she thought, oh, maybe some nice moi moi, maybe some egusi with the pumpkin seeds, maybe some spinach, maybe some jollof rice. And then suddenly she looked up and she saw the cage and she saw the bird and the beautiful colors. And she thought, a bird this beautiful must have very tasty meat. And so she opened the cage door. She took out the bird. She's in a hunter's house, and so all the knives were sharp. She began to pluck the feathers from around the bird's neck. She took her knife and whoosh, she cut off the head. She began to prepare a delicious meal for her son. She chopped the bird into pieces. She tidied away all the feathers and the entrails. She placed the meat into a pot, and then she looked for seasoning because this meal had to be perfect for her young son. But as she looked around his house, was there any seasoning to be found? Nothing at all. Ha! How can somebody live in a house with no salt, no pepper, no seasoning, no nothing? I will not serve bland food. And so she decided to go back to her house to fetch her special seasoning and make sure that the food she served her son was the finest meal that he would ever taste. Off she went. And it wasn't long before Ochosi returned home. The first thing he saw was that the cage was empty, the bird was gone. Somebody has stolen my bird. He couldn't believe it. And he looked around. He was desperate because he knew that Elegba would arrive in just a few hours. He grabbed his snares. He raced back out into the forest, right to where he had found the first bird. He placed the traps down. Please, 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 I need a miracle. I am begging you, begging you, begging you. And a miracle he received. A little bird flew across the sky through the branches of the trees, and it landed on his shoulder. And it was the mate of the first bird. And he took it, and it was just as beautiful. He held it to his chest. He took it home. He put it in the cage. He locked the door, fed it the grain, and he did not take his eyes off it. And a few hours later, Elegba returned, and he was thrilled, delighted with this bird. Oh, Olodumare will be so happy. Ochosi, I cannot take credit for this alone. You must come to Orun with me. Me? Orun? Yes, yes, yes. He was elated. His dream was coming true. And he immediately oiled his skin until he shone like the stars. He combed out his hair until it puffed out into a halo. He wore his finest robes. And when he was ready, the two of them climbed the ladder of light that led to Orun. It was more beautiful than he had imagined. The fragrances, the sounds, the colors, everything was perfection. And then the giving of the gifts began. And Olodumare, he received each gift with grace and gratitude, thanked whoever gave it to him, and then placed the gift to one side. And when he saw the bird, he summoned silence. He said, "Who has given me this bird?" And Elegba stepped forward and said, "The gift is from me, but it was this man, Ochosi, who helped me find it." And Ochosi was summoned before the Creator. Now, I'm sure that all of us gathered here, we have all very different spiritual, religious backgrounds, and it doesn't matter what yours is, but think if you were to meet the Creator of everything, of the universe, of the world, of life itself. Ochosi didn't know how to feel, what to think. He wondered, do I approach strong and tall, or do I grovel on the ground? Do I look the Creator in the eye, or do I lower my gaze to the ground? He trembled, he quivered, he shook, he didn't know what he was doing, but somehow he made his way before the Creator. And Olodumare looked at him. Ochosi, I know who you are. I have seen you in your forest, and I know how much you love and respect it. And I am pleased with this gift that you have chosen for me. And because I am pleased, I am going to honor your request. From this moment on, you will be known as Ochosi, the Orisha of the hunt. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. He was filled with emotion. He fell to the ground, tears of joy streaming down his face. He leapt up. He embraced the other Orishas. He was welcomed into the fold. It was beautiful. And after he had been embraced, after his emotions had calmed down, Olodumare summoned him again and said, Ochosi, now that you are one of us, I want to give you a gift. Anything your heart desires. And Ochosi began to think, but he didn't know what to ask for. The only thing that he had ever wanted was this, and now he had it. He began to think of how long he had dreamt of it, how long he had desired it. He longed to possess it. And then he began to think how close he had come to having none of it at all. Somebody had stolen his bird. And if by some miracle the other one had not flown through the skies and landed on his shoulder, then he would still be Ochosi, the man, the hunter in the middle of a forest, so he knew exactly what he wanted. He took out his bow and arrow, and he said, when I release this arrow, I wanted to pierce the heart of the person who stole my bird. But Olodumare knows everything, and he said, I ask that you reconsider your request. But by now, Ochosi was all fired up. No, that is what I want. When I release this arrow, it must pierce the heart of the person who stole my bird. And Olodumare granted his request. And the arrow, it flew through the skies and the clouds and the trees and straight into the heart of Ochosi's mother. And as she fell backwards to the ground, her cries carried up to Orun, and Ochosi recognized her voice. And when he heard the voice, he said, no, this is not what I want. Please, I beg you, take it back. I just want things to be as they were. Please, I'm begging you, take it back, take it back. This is not what I want. I just want to be back in the forest. But Olodumare does not turn back time. And Ochosi fell to the ground, a broken heap of a man. And when the tears had eventually dried, Olodumare raised him upwards. And he said, Ochosi, you have learned a very painful lesson today. You have seen that you must never judge one action on one truth alone. You must look at all the truths surrounding any action. And because of that, you will not be just the Orisha of the hunt. You will also be the Orisha of justice. And so to this day, there are people who still pray to the Orisha. And when they're caught in that moment where you genuinely don't know if something is right or wrong, they pray to the Orisha Ochosi for guidance in helping them make the right decision. And that is the story of Ochosi. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
My, what a powerful, powerful story. Oh my. And so many little twists and turns in there. I was thinking it was going in one direction and then it shut off in another and stuff. Just a marvelous story. And thank you ever so much for that great gift. Thank you indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last teller for this afternoon is there we are. Ken, I think I pressed the wrong button or something here on my side. There we go. Ken, there we go. So our next teller is Taffy Thomas, and Taffy is the the first story laureate of England. And he started out as a trained person in literature and drama at Dudley College. And after teaching for several years in Wolverhampton, he founded and directed the legendary folk theater, The Magic Lantern, illustrating traditional stories and songs with shadow puppets and circus skills. He founded and directed the community arts company Shibari with his popular touring unit, the Fabulous Salami Brothers, which he fronted and performed in. After a major stroke at the age of 36, Taffy turned back to storytelling as a self-imposed speech therapy, which turned into a new career. Taffy has a repertoire of more than 300 stories, collected mainly from traditional oral sources, which he is happy to tell in almost any situation. He now is the most experienced English storyteller, having performed in many countries over 4 continents. And what his bio there didn't say, but he's also been honored by the Queen for his work there with an MBE, and just amazing career. And Taffy, the last story from you, please.
It's not working.
There we go.
Taffy, you're muted.
You need to unmute.
Taffy, you're muted. Taffy, unmute. Can somebody unmute him?
There we are.
There we are.
Are you on?
Ruth rode on my motorbike. Ruth rode back of me. I hit a bump and Ruth fell off. I rode on ruthlessly. That was just my sound check, all right? Always do that as a sound check. I'm unmute. Sorry about that. As you've discovered, I'm a complete technophobe, but I'm lucky enough to have my friend Tony Farron there and my wife Chrissy to help me. So, as I say, great to meet up with Margaret Bennett again after all these years, and also to share a virtual stage with Mara, because in a month's time, we're going to be sharing an actual stage as guests of the Edinburgh Science Festival. So it was great to hear Mara for the first time on this concert. But we'll be together in a month, Mara. Looking forward to it, mate. Anyway, I'm sort of, as you've heard from my introduction, a personification of the lost and found theme, because when I had a stroke 36 years ago, suddenly I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I couldn't use a knife and fork. And storytelling gave me speech again. So I lost my speech and then found it through storytelling. And the story I'm going to tell found me, because having decided that I would find stories from people, it took me to Scotland, in particular to one of Scotland's traveling people, Betsy White, the late Betsy White, a dear friend of mine. And Betsy introduced me to other storytellers. She introduced me to Duncan Williamson, the legendary Duncan Williamson, who gave me the story that I'm going to tell you. And Betsy also introduced me to the Stuarts from Blair Gowrie. Now, the Stuart family from Blair Gowrie, Belle Stuart the mother, and Alec the father, and Sheila the daughter, had so much music and so many songs and tales that when Hamish Henderson, a wonderful folklorist, went to collect from them, he said it was like standing under Niagara Falls with a teacup. They were so rich in all they had, which is great. I had the pleasure of telling the story I'm going to tell you now to Sheila herself the last time we shared the stage at Whitby Folk Festival. And she was over the moon that I put her and her family in the story. Also, as spring is crawling over the parapet at the moment today for a walk. I found this yellow broom in flower, which is perfect for this story, as you will hear. Anyway, Duncan, when he gave me the story, said, "I give you the bones, Taffy, you put the flesh on it." So this is how I put the flesh on it. Alec Stewart was the prince, the king of the pipers. He once told me that he went to Balmoral and played for the young princesses. That was our Queen Elizabeth II and her sister Princess Margaret. Alec and Belle had a daughter, Sheila. And like all parents, Alec wanted to buy a toy for the baby Sheila. He actually wanted to buy her a teddy bear. But Alec Stewart's pockets were empty. But then, being a piper, he thought if he made his way to Blairgowrie, to the square, and played his pipes all afternoon, then he could put his hat down and collect enough money to buy a teddy bear for baby Sheila. And in some ways, the hardest kind of losing something is if you have it stolen, particularly if it's your time. Because as an American storyteller David Holt once said to me, if it wasn't for time, everything would happen at once. So there we go, on with the story. Alec decided he would go and busk for a day to get the money for a teddy bear for young Sheila. But it was the middle of winter and there was snow on the ground, as happens in Perthshire. Margaret will tell you that. So he put on his tackety boots, grabbed his pipes and started to traipse through the snow. But tramping through the snow, he got tired. Then ahead of him, he saw a little mound of snow, a little hillock, and he thought he'd sit on that and tune his pipes. So he sat down, took his pipes out and started to tune them. And then to his amazement, the little hill he was sitting on started to move and crack open. And he realized he was sitting on top of a fairy fort, a hollow hill where the fairies, the little people, live. And out from that crack in the hill came a tiny man in a little yellow suit with a pointy hat. And he said, "Alec Stewart, you are the king of the pipers. Now my king, the king of the fairies, is his 150th birthday today. And he wants to have a party. But the band that he's booked, Jock Thompson's Bairns, they can't get here because the snow's so deep. But he says, if you'll come and play your pipes for the party, he'll pay you a bag of fairy gold." And Alec Stewart thought, if I go into Blair and play my pipes all day, I won't get a bag of gold. I'll have to do it. So he ducked his head and followed the little man to the crack in the hill, down this long corridor into a hall. And there at the end of the hall, sitting in a high chair, was a very old man with a long white beard and a tiny gold crown on, the king of the fairies. And Alec bowed to him. And the king of the fairies said, "Alec Stewart, play for my party and I'll pay you a bag of fairy gold." And then the king called for a small stool to be placed at his feet and bade Alec sit down on it. So Alec sat down and got his pipes out and tuned them. And the king of the fairies stood up and said, "Now, take your partners for the Gay Gordons." Now, I normally have a piper with me for this, but I haven't, so you have to sing with me. And he struck up with the tune of Scotland the Brave, and out of cracks in the walls came all these little people and started jigging and dancing as he played da 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 bum 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 ba da 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 bum 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 da 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 bum 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 ba da da. And they were burling round the room. And then he played an encore for that dance, but then it was supper time, because you don't go very far at a fairy party or even a Scottish ceilidh before it's supper time. And out from other cracks in the walls came the fairy chefs, and on their heads they had trays, and on those trays there were fairy cakes, fairy sausages on sticks, and flower heads like daffodil heads. But those daffodil heads were cups, and in those cups there was mead. Don't know if you've ever had mead, any of you. It's a honey liqueur. It can be very sweet, but it's falling over water. It's very nice. And this was taken around everyone who was there, and then one of them went over to Alec himself. But Alec Stewart had been warned by his mother and his grandmother never to accept a gift from the fairies, because if you ever accept a gift from the fairies, they have you in their power. But it must be said, Alec Stewart was never the man to turn down a drink. So he just took the tray and took one of the flower heads with the mead and supped it back, and it was great. Then to soak it up, he had a fairy cake, and then another flower head. Back it went. Another sausage on a stick, then another flower head, and everybody else had their supper there. It was all over. And then the chefs came around and collected all the trays and took them back to the fairy kitchen and put them in the fairy dishwasher, because they did have those even in those days. And then the king of the fairies stood up and said, I'm 150 years old, and it's past 9 o'clock, which means it's past my bedtime. So we've just got time for the last dance. So we'll end as we began. So take your partners for the gay Gordons. And, woo! And again, Alex struck up. Da 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 dum bum 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 da 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 dum bum 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 da 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 dum bum 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 da 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 little little da 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 dum bum 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 da 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 bum 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 da 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 dum bum 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 da dum ba dum. Then Alec immediately bowed to the king, and the king put his hand under his cloak, and he pulled out a tiny leather bag. He said, "Thank you for playing for my party. Made it a truly memorable occasion. Here is your bag of fairy gold. You're free to go." But when Alex Stewart looked over at the end wall where he'd come in, it was completely sealed up. So he turned to the king of the fairies and said, "I'm trapped in here. Will you please make the cave open?" And the king of the fairies stamped his foot 3 times and pointed to the wall of the cave, and it cracked open. And Alex Stewart peered out, expecting to see snow and his footprints leading into the cave from the way he'd come in. But do you know, there was no snow there, and just like today, it was a bright, hot spring day, and the sun was shining. And Alex Stewart thought, my goodness, how long have I been in there? He thought he'd been in there for only about 3 or 4 hours. But in fact, he'd been in there for 3 or 4 months, because the fairy folk had taken his time, because he'd accepted a gift from them. And as he walked out blinking into the sunshine, he was absolutely furious that he'd had his time stolen. So in a stecky, a tantrum, he took this leather bag of fairy gold and he dashed it as hard as he could on a rock, and the bag split open and all the pieces of gold scattered into the bushes. Now those bushes were gorse bushes or broom bushes, and to this time of the year, if you go here in the debatable lands where I live, or into the lowlands or the highlands of Scotland, on those bushes you can see bright yellow flowers, just like the ones I'm showing you here. Well, I say bright yellow flowers. I used to think they were flowers, but ever since Duncan told me the story, I know they're not flowers at all. They're actually pieces of fairy gold. And to this day, Scotland's travelling people in the winter rest in the cities and the towns in houses, and then take to the road again when the yellow's on the broom. In fact, my friend Duncan wrote a song for Betsy White, which goes, "Come sit beside me, Maggie love, I want to see you gloom. I will take you on the road when the yellow's on the broom." And I know Margaret told me before we started this concert that when she set off today, there was yellow on the broom where she lived, and she passed the information on to Elizabeth Stewart from another branch of the Stewart family. And Elizabeth Stewart, who is currently in a care home in Scotland. So Scotland's travellers still very much live by that. And it's been an honour to tell you this story because I've been blessed, just as Margaret have, by knowing having met all of the people I mentioned in the story for you tonight. And there's now a generation of people interested in what we do who haven't met those people. And I can actually share that meeting with them, because true immortality is if somebody can tell your stories, play your tunes, and sing your songs after you're dead and gone. Wire bend, story, end.
Thank you, Kathy, so much. That was an amazing, amazing story. We have the stories of the little people here as well, and how they take people away. Here we say you're away with fairies.
They steal children.
Right? And people disappear for a long period of time, bewildered by the fairies until they find their way back home.
But Seamus Ennis, the Irish piper and storyteller, told me that if you wear a jacket inside out, then you can't be fairy led. They can't take you. So there's a tip to save you all from being away with the fairies. And just wear a jacket inside out.
Turn your pockets inside out.
Here we say, yes, you can turn your coat inside out. You can put your hat on backwards. But we have a kind of a bread here, a hard tack, it's called, a hard bread. And they say if you take some of it with you and you can crack off pieces, it's very hard, and throw that, then the fairies will chase after the bread and not you. So some people, even when the newborn babies, they'll take a cake of hard bread and put it in the crib with the baby to keep the fairies away.
Fantastic.
There you go.
We've got so much in common, even though we have the ocean between us. Which is great.
Well, there you are. Absolutely. And Taffy, when I teach storytelling courses, I end with a story about you. And the poem that was written about you, maybe 50 years ago now, I suppose, or 30 odd.
Yeah.
The poem called Storyteller.
The Storyteller, yeah, fantastic, yeah. I'm delighted you.
And so, yeah, and so I finish off with that, and for people who don't know it, the last four lines in the story goes, "My stories are ageless; they never grow old. With each telling, they're born anew. When my story is ended, I'll still be alive in the tales that I've given to you." And that's marvelous what you have given us today, and all the tellers here have given us today. Wonderful stories to carry on.
I usually finish my stories by saying thank you all for listening, because if speaking was more important than listening, we'd have two tongues and one ear. So thank you all for listening to my tale. And maybe we'll get to meet in person at some point, because certainly I've never been to St. John's, but now it's on the list, on the bucket list.
Absolutely. We're delighted to have you here. Absolutely. Thank you very, very much.
It's been a huge pleasure. I'm honored to be asked. Thank you so much. And wonderful to meet all the others who shared the stage with.
We're thrilled that all of you were able to come with us today through this medium of Zoom, and all over the world, from all the backgrounds, with stories that were lost and found again and given again. Just remarkable stories, and thrilled to share them with everybody here today. So a little bit of housekeeping to clue things up. We have to thank our sponsors. And first of all, I'm going to start thanking Arts NL, the Newfoundland Labrador Arts Society, the Canada Council for the Arts, BCAH, the Building Communities through Arts and Heritage, the Department of Heritage, and we greatly appreciate all of their support, without which we could never carry on and do this wonderful stuff. We have, through the pandemic, tried to keep all of our stuff free for people to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this, and if you would like to make a contribution to help us keep these things on the go, you may do so. Elaine is going to post a link in the chat where you can buy us a cup of coffee, as they say, and help keep these series on the go. We are offering a game online. We have a series of workshops coming up over the next 3 or 4 weeks or so. Andy Cox is doing one on March 27. Donna Washington is doing one on April the 10th. And Olivia Armstrong is going to do one on April the 24th. And those are 2-hour workshops. If you go to the St. John's Storytelling website, you're going to be able to get full descriptions of time and the content for each of those workshops. There is limited space in the workshops. And so if you would, register earlier than sooner, or earlier than later, I should say, then you'll have yourself on the list so that you can partake in those storytelling workshops. Each one priced separately. You don't have to buy the whole series. You can do each one. The next thing is our regular storytelling circle, and that is scheduled for April the 13th. And we're not sure yet what's going to happen with that, whether or not it will be in person or whether it will be another online presentation. For those of you on our St. John's Storytelling website or mail distribution list, then you will be getting notices about that. For those of you who aren't, then please check with our website and we'll have information up there as quickly as we can. So I don't know if there are any other storytelling announcements that need to be shared today. If there's any, I don't know, Elaine, if you can see, Ken, if you can see anybody who wants to make an announcement there. So seeing no hands up or anything like that, again, thanks everyone for showing up today, to our tellers and to our listeners. As they say, you can't tell a story if you don't have someone to tell it to. So the listeners and the storytellers are both critical parts of the storytelling process. So again, thanks very much for joining us today, and please stay safe and well till we meet again. Bye for now.
Cherry pie.
The recording has stopped.
Yeah.
Name is.
Several people still on if you want to say goodbye.
I'm sending goodbye.
Yeah, tell
Gary,
Well,
thank
again,
you as well. Thanks to you for holding it all together as well. And to Catherine and
Well-
Elaine and everybody at the Storytelling Centre. Yeah.
absolutely. The group pulled it together, and we're so delighted that everybody was able to accept our invitation to tell today. Just a huge thrill for us to be able to have people from such diverse backgrounds tell stories today. Amazing. Even in blackouts, Mara, where you are, are you in Scotland?
No, I'm in
Scotland
Kenya.
or-
So I'm surrounded by fairy lights and all sorts of things, just in case it went, and
Oh
it
my-
went. But yeah, thank you.
We're so
Thanks very
grateful.
much.
Just one.
See you to the next meeting, wherever it is. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful,
Thanks very much.
Margaret.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
bye-bye. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending.
Yes,
Thanks, Dollar Tellers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Marianne, I love your cat as well. Very cute. Bye.
Bye, Margaret. Bye.
Ruth's over there a little beyond out of focus, but there you go. She's saying bye to you too.
Bye-bye.
Till we meet again.